The woman stumbled into White River, South Dakota, just after dawn on a scorching July morning in 1882. Her dress torn and dusty, her dark hair matted with dried blood. And when Marshal Theodore Jenkins asked her name, she opened her mouth, but no sound came out except a strangled whimper that made his chest tighten with concern. Marshal Jenkins had seen plenty of trouble in his 30 years, the last 6 of them keeping peace in this railroad town on the edge of the Dakota Territory. But something about the terror in this woman's green eyes struck him differently than the usual drifters and desperados who passed through. She looked to be in her early 20s, with delicate features that spoke of gentler circumstances than whatever had brought her here, bloody and speechless. Her hands trembled as she clutched at the doorframe of his office, swaying on her feet like she might collapse at any moment. "Easy there," he said, rising quickly from behind his desk and rounding it to catch her elbow before she fell. His hand was gentle but steady as he guided her to the wooden chair across from where he had been sitting. "You are safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you here." She flinched at his touch initially, then seemed to realize he meant no harm. When she sank into the chair, she pulled her knees up defensively, wrapping her arms around them despite the heat already building in the small office. The marshal had opened both windows to catch any breeze off the White River, but the air hung thick and still, promising another blistering day. Marshal Jenkins was a tall man, lean from years of hard riding, with dark hair going gray at the temples and blue eyes that could be steel or kindness, depending on what the situation called for. Right now, they were nothing but concerned as he crouched down to be at eye level with the frightened woman. "My name is Marshal Theodore Jenkins, but folks around here call me Mitch," he said quietly, keeping his voice low and even like he was talking to a spooked horse. "Can you tell me your name?" Again, she opened her mouth. Again, nothing but a small, pained sound emerged. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her dirt-streaked cheeks. She shook her head frantically, whether in answer to his question or in frustration with herself. He could not tell. "That is all right," Mitch said quickly, pulling a handkerchief from his vest pocket and offering it to her. "Take your time. You are safe now. Nobody is going to rush you." She took the handkerchief with shaking fingers and pressed it to her face. Through the thin fabric, he could hear her trying to control her breathing, trying to master the fear that had her in its grip. "Can you nod or shake your head to answer questions?" he asked. "That might be easier." After a moment, she lowered the handkerchief and nodded. "Good. That is real good." Mitch straightened up and went to the small stove in the corner where he kept a pot of coffee going most hours of the day. He poured a cup and brought it to her. "This will help. It is not fancy, but it is hot and strong." She wrapped both hands around the tin cup, seeming to draw comfort from its warmth despite the heat. She took a careful sip, then another. Some of the shaking in her hands began to subside. "Did someone hurt you?" Mitch asked, settling himself on the edge of his desk rather than going back behind it. He wanted to seem approachable, not authoritative. She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Are they still following you?" Another nod, more vigorous this time. The fear in her eyes intensified, and she glanced toward the door as if expecting someone to burst through it at any moment. Mitch felt his jaw tighten. "Then we will make sure you are protected. I am the law in this town, and I take that seriously. Can you tell me how many there are?" "Hold up fingers if that is easier." She held up 2 fingers, then hesitated and added a third. 3 men, she nodded. "And where did you come from? How far have you traveled?" She gestured vaguely west and north, then shrugged helplessly. Days of travel, he guessed, maybe more. Her dress and boots told that story clearly enough. This woman had been running hard and long, and whatever had happened to her had stolen her voice along with everything else. "All right," Mitch said, making a decision. First thing we need to do is get you cleaned up and looked after. Doc Harrison can check that head wound and make sure nothing else needs tending. Then we will get you somewhere safe to rest. After that, when you are ready, we can work out the rest. Does that sound acceptable? The relief that flooded her face was answer enough. She nodded and attempted something that might have been a smile, though it came out more like a grimace. Mitch offered his arm. "Can you walk?" She set down the coffee cup and stood, wavering only slightly. When she took his arm, he could feel how thin she was beneath the torn calico dress. This woman had not just been running. She had been starving too. They stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk that fronted the main street of White River. The town was waking up properly now, with storekeepers opening their doors and a few early risers heading toward the general store or the restaurant. Mitch saw several people glance their way with curiosity, but he gave them the kind of look that said he would explain later and they should mind their own business now. Most folks in White River knew him well enough to respect that. Doc Harrison's place was 3 buildings down above the barber shop. The old physician was just coming out when they approached, medical bag in hand, clearly on his way to make a house call. "Doc," Mitch called. "Got a patient for you. It is urgent." Charles Harrison was in his 60s, with a full white beard and the patient demeanor of a man who had seen every kind of injury and illness the frontier could produce. He took one look at the woman on Mitch's arm and immediately turned back toward his door. "Bring her up," he said. "Mrs. Cooper will have to wait another hour for her rheumatism tonic." The office was cluttered but clean, smelling of carbolic acid and the various herbs Doc Harrison cultivated in pots along his windowsills. He directed the woman to lie down on the examination table and looked to Mitch. "What happened?" "Do not know yet," Mitch said. "She cannot speak, or will not. I have not determined which." "Trauma can do that," Doc Harrison said, already examining the wound on her scalp with gentle fingers. "Physical or otherwise. This gash is a few days old, healing reasonably well. Might scar, but it is clean. No signs of infection." He continued his examination while Mitch waited by the door, giving the woman what privacy he could while still staying close enough to be reassuring. Doc Harrison was thorough and professional, and when he finally stepped back, his expression was grim. "Bruises on her arms and legs, some defensive wounds on her hands," he reported quietly. "Signs of rough treatment, but nothing that will not heal given time and proper care. The voice is another matter. Could be injury to the throat, but I see no external marks. More likely it is shock. The mind protecting itself from something it cannot bear to speak aloud. Will it come back? Cannot say for certain. Sometimes these things resolve on their own. Sometimes they need more than medicine can provide." Doc Harrison turned to the woman, who had sat up on the table and was watching them both anxiously. "Miss, you have been through something terrible, but your body will mend. As for your voice, do not push it. Let it come back naturally if it will." She nodded, looking somehow disappointed and relieved at once. "She needs food and rest," Doc Harrison continued. "Proper meals, not trail rations, and she should not be alone, not in her state." Mitch had already been thinking along those lines. "I will take her to Mrs. Patterson. The boarding house always has rooms, and if anyone can mother hen someone back to health, it is Gertrude Patterson." "Good thinking." Doc Harrison prepared a small bottle of laudanum, for sleeping if the nightmares get too bad, just a few drops in water before bed. They left the doctor's office with the woman looking marginally better, at least physically. Mitch kept his pace slow as they walked toward the edge of town where the boarding house stood, a large 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that Gertrude Patterson tended with military precision. "Mrs. Patterson is a widow," Mitch explained as they walked. Lost her husband 10 years back to fever. She has been running the boarding house ever since, and she has a good heart under all that starch. You will be comfortable there." The woman squeezed his arm gently, a silent thank you. Gertrude Patterson answered the door herself, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was a woman in her 50s, sturdy and practical, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her expression was stern until she saw the state of Mitch's companion, and then it softened immediately into something almost tender. "Mercy," she breathed. "Mitch, what have you brought me?" "A guest in need of sanctuary," he said. "She has been through considerable trouble, Mrs. Patterson. She needs a safe room, good meals, and someone watching over her. I will cover the costs." "You will not," Gertrude said firmly, already ushering the woman inside. "Any soul in need has a place here, and I will not take money for basic Christian charity. Come in, dear. Let us get you into a bath and some clean clothes. I have a room at the back that is quiet and cool. You will be comfortable there." The transformation in the woman was remarkable. Knowing she would be cared for by another woman seemed to ease something in her that Mitch's well-meaning help had not been able to reach. She went with Mrs. Patterson willingly, looking back only once to give Mitch a look of such profound gratitude that it made his throat tight. "I will check in later," he called after them. "Mrs. Patterson, if anyone comes asking about her, anyone at all, you send for me immediately." "Of course, Marshal." Gertrude's eyes sharpened. "Should I be worried? Just cautious." She indicated 3 men might be following her trail. Gertrude's mouth became a thin line. "Then they will find White River is not hospitable to men who hurt women. Go on about your business, Mitch. She is safe with me." Mitch believed it. Gertrude Patterson kept a shotgun behind her counter and knew how to use it, as more than one rowdy boarder had learned to his dismay. Still, he found himself reluctant to leave. Something about this particular woman had gotten under his skin in a way he could not quite name. Maybe it was the fear in her eyes, or the way she had tried so hard to speak and could not. Or maybe it was just that he had been alone too long and was getting soft in his old age. He was not old, he reminded himself as he walked back toward his office. 30 was not old by any measure, even if some days it felt like he had lived several lifetimes already. The war had aged him, then the years drifting afterward, and finally settling into law work had aged him more. He had seen too much death, too much cruelty, too much of the worst that people could do to each other. That kind of knowledge settled into your bones and made you weary, but it also made you want to protect the innocent when you found them. And that woman, whoever she was innocent. He would stake his badge on it. Back at his office, Mitch spent the rest of the morning catching up on paperwork and keeping an eye on the street. White River was a growing town, perched on the railroad line that brought cattle up from Texas and goods from back east. The railroad meant prosperity, but it also meant strangers passing through regularly, and not all of them had good intentions. Mitch prided himself on knowing who belonged and who did not, and by midday, he had spotted 3 men who definitely did not belong. They rode in separately, which was the first suspicious thing. Men traveling together usually arrived together, but these 3 came from the west at intervals, and each one had the look of a man on a hunt. They were rough-cut, armed heavily, and they asked questions at the saloon, the general store, and the livery stable. Questions about a woman traveling alone. Mitch made his own quiet rounds, warning the townspeople to keep their mouths shut and keep their eyes open. White River was a close-knit community, and they protected their own. A stranger in trouble became their own the moment they asked for help. By evening, the 3 men had taken rooms at the hotel, clearly planning to stay a while and search methodically. Mitch watched them from his office window as they conferred on the hotel steps, pointing this way and that, planning their search pattern. He recognized the type. Bounty hunters, maybe, or hired guns. Men who would not give up easily. When the sun started to set, painting the Dakota sky in shades of orange and purple, Mitch locked up his office and headed to the boarding house. He found Mrs. Patterson in her kitchen, rolling out dough for tomorrow's bread. She looked up when he knocked on the doorframe and gestured him in with a floury hand. "She is sleeping," Gertrude reported before he could ask. Ate like she had not seen food in a week, which she probably had not. Took a bath, put on one of my old dresses, and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Poor thing is exhausted. I imagined so. Mitch leaned against the doorframe, suddenly tired himself. 3 men rode into town today asking after a woman traveling alone. I need to know more about what I am dealing with, Mrs. Patterson. When she wakes, I need to try to get some answers from her, even if she cannot speak. Use a slate, Gertrude suggested. I have one from when I used to tutor children. She can write her answers if her hands are steady enough. That is a fine idea, thank you. Gertrude studied him with shrewd eyes. You are taking this personal, Mitch Jenkins. Any crime in my jurisdiction is personal. This is more than that, and you know it. She returned to her dough, kneading it with practiced efficiency. Not that I am criticizing. It is about time you took an interest in something besides that badge, but be careful. That girl is fragile right now. She needs help, not complications. I know that, Mitch said, perhaps more sharply than he intended. I am trying to help her, nothing more. Of course. Gertrude's tone suggested she did not believe him for a minute, but she let it drop. Come back in the morning. She should be awake by then and maybe in a better state to communicate. Mitch thanked her and left, but he did not go home to his small house at the edge of town. Instead, he found himself circling back to the main street, keeping watch on the hotel where the 3 men were staying. He saw them come out after dark and head into the saloon, and he followed at a discreet distance. The saloon was doing good business, as it usually did on a Friday night. Cowboys from the nearby ranches mixed with townspeople, railroad workers, and travelers, creating the kind of noise and chaos that Mitch usually found tiresome. Tonight, though, it provided good cover. He took a spot at the far end of the bar and nursed a whiskey while watching the 3 men in the mirror behind the bottles. They were not subtle. They asked the bartender questions, showed him something that was probably a photograph or a sketch, and got emphatic headshakes in response. The bartender was Sam Tucker, a good man who had been in White River since its founding, and Mitch had already spoken to him earlier. Sam would not give them anything. The 3 men moved through the saloon, approaching other patrons with the same questions and getting the same results. The townspeople had closed ranks, as Mitch had known they would. But the strangers were persistent, and their frustration was starting to show. One of them, a big man with a scar across his cheek, slammed his fist on a table hard enough to make glasses jump. "We know she came through here," Scarface snarled at the cowboy he had been questioning. "Girl with dark hair, green eyes, traveling alone. You are telling me nobody saw her." "I am telling you I did not see her," the cowboy replied evenly. "And I do not appreciate being called a liar in my own town's saloon. Now back off before we have a problem." Mitch set down his glass and moved closer, letting his badge catch the lamplight. "Evening, gentlemen. I am Marshal Jenkins. I understand you are looking for someone." The 3 men turned to face him, sizing him up with the kind of quick assessment that professional fighters used. Scarface was clearly the leader. The other 2 were younger, maybe mid-20s, with the hard eyes of men who had seen violence and dealt it out in equal measure. "That is right, Marshal," Scarface said, modulating his tone to something almost respectful. "We are looking for a woman who ran off from her family up in Montana Territory. Her father hired us to bring her back safe. Name is Olivia Grayson. You seen anyone matching that description?" Olivia Grayson. So that was her name, or at least that was what these men were calling her. Mitch kept his face carefully neutral. "Cannot say that I have," he said. "But then, lots of folks pass through White River on the railroad. She could have come and gone before I noticed." "What makes you think she is here?" "Been tracking her for near on 2 weeks," one of the younger men volunteered. "Trail led straight to this town." "Well, if I see anyone matching your description, I will be sure to let you know," Mitch said smoothly. "Though I have to say, if a woman is running that hard from her family, maybe she has good reason. Maybe her family should let her go." Scarface's expression darkened. "That is not your concern, Marshal. This is a family matter. We have papers authorizing us to bring her back to her father." "I would like to see those papers." "Why, you just said you have not seen her." Mitch smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because if she does show up, I will want to know what I am dealing with. And because I am the law here, and I make it my business to know what is happening in my town. So if you gentlemen want to continue your search in White River, you will show me your authorization. Otherwise, you can move along." The tension stretched taut as a wire. For a moment, Mitch thought they might push it, might force a confrontation right here in the saloon. His hand drifted casually toward the gun at his hip, and he saw several of the townspeople shift position, ready to back him up if it came to that. Finally, Scarface reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He handed it over with poorly concealed anger. Mitch unfolded it and read carefully, holding it up to the lamplight. It was official-looking enough, signed by someone claiming to be Jonathan Grayson of Helena, Montana Territory, authorizing the bearers to retrieve his daughter Olivia and return her to his custody. But Mitch had seen enough forged documents in his career to be suspicious of any paper that seemed too convenient. "This says she is mentally unsound," Mitch observed. "That she is a danger to herself and others. That does not match the description of a woman running for her life." "She is delusional," Scarface said. "Thinks her family is trying to hurt her when they only want to help. That is why she ran, why she would lie if you found her. You cannot trust anything she says, Marshal." It was a clever tactic, Mitch had to admit. Discredit the victim before she could even speak. Make anyone who might help her doubt her story. But it was also exactly the kind of thing an abuser would say. "I will keep this for my records," Mitch said, folding the document and tucking it into his vest. "If your Miss Grayson shows up, I will want to verify this with her father directly before I turn anyone over to you. Telegraph to Helena should only take a day or two. That document gives us the authority, in Montana Territory maybe. Here in South Dakota, I am the authority." Mitch's voice went cold and flat. "You will play by my rules or you will leave my town." "Understood." The 3 men exchanged glances. Finally, Scarface nodded curtly. "Understood, Marshal. We will wait for your telegraph, but do not wait too long. Girl could hurt herself if she is not properly supervised." They left the saloon in a group, and Mitch watched them go with a sick feeling in his gut. Everything about this situation felt wrong. The document might be legitimate, but the men carrying it were not. He had seen enough hired thugs to recognize the breed, and these 3 were definitely that. He stayed at the saloon another hour, making sure they did not come back and cause more trouble, then finally headed home. His house was small and spare. Just a bedroom, a main room with a kitchen area, and a porch where he sometimes sat on summer evenings. He had never bothered to make it into a home, never saw the point when he spent most of his time at the office anyway. Tonight, though, the emptiness of it bothered him. He found himself thinking about the woman, Olivia, sleeping safely at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, and wondering what her story really was. wondering if Grayson was truly her father or someone else entirely, wondering what she had been running from, and whether 3 men with guns would be enough to drag her back to it. He barely slept that night, starting awake at every sound, hand reaching for the gun he kept on the bedside table. When dawn finally broke, he was already up and dressed, making coffee and planning his day. First, he would send that telegraph to Helena, though he doubted it would yield useful results. Men who sent hired guns after women were not usually honest in their correspondence. Second, he would check on Olivia and see if she could communicate better with rest and safety behind her. Third, he would make damn sure those 3 men did not get anywhere near her. The telegraph office opened at 7. Mitch was waiting at the door when the operator, a young man named Billy Hendricks, unlocked it. "Morning, Marshal. You are here early. Need to send a message to Helena, Montana Territory, to a Jonathan Grayson." Mitch dictated the message carefully, asking Grayson to confirm his identity, his relationship to Olivia Grayson, and whether he had indeed hired 3 men to retrieve his daughter. He also asked for a physical description of Olivia, to confirm they were even talking about the same woman. "Send that priority. I need a response as soon as possible." "Will do, Marshal." Billy tapped out the message with practiced speed, the telegraph key clicking rapidly. "Should hear back by this afternoon if they are prompt about it." Mitch thanked him and headed to the boarding house. The smell of bacon and fresh bread met him at the door, making his stomach growl. He had forgotten to eat dinner last night, too wound up to think about food. Mrs. Patterson let him in with a knowing look. "She is awake, eating breakfast in the kitchen. Go on back." He found Olivia sitting at the small kitchen table, a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. She had cleaned up remarkably well. Her dark hair was brushed and pinned back, revealing a heart-shaped face with high cheekbones and those striking green eyes. The bruises on her arms were visible below the short sleeves of the borrowed dress, yellowish-purple marks that made Mitch's jaw tighten with anger. She looked up when he entered, and something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, yes, but also something warmer. Relief. Trust. She set down her fork and watched him approach. "Morning," Mitch said, pulling out a chair across from her. "I hope you slept well." She nodded, offering a small smile that transformed her face despite everything she had been through. "I brought something that might help us communicate." He set the slate and chalk that Mrs. Patterson had provided on the table between them. "If you can write, maybe you can tell me what happened. Tell me what you are running from." Olivia stared at the slate for a long moment, then slowly reached for the chalk. Her hand trembled as she wrote, the letters shaky but legible. "My name is Olivia Grayson." Mitch read it and nodded. "The men looking for you, they said that was your name. Said your father sent them to bring you home because you are mentally unsound. Is that true? Is Jonathan Grayson your father?" She was already shaking her head emphatically before he finished speaking. She wiped the slate clean with her sleeve and wrote quickly, "He is not my father. He killed my father, wants to force me to marry him to get our land." Mitch felt his blood run cold. "Grayson killed your father." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She wrote more, the words coming faster now as if a dam had broken. "My real father was Thomas Grayson. He owned a ranch in Montana. Jonathan is his cousin. He came to visit and then father died. They said it was heart failure, but I saw Jonathan putting something in his whiskey. I confronted him and he laughed. Said we would marry and the ranch would be his legally. When I refused, he locked me in my room. I escaped, but he sent those men after me." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Land, money, and power, the oldest motives in the world for murder. "Why can you not speak?" Mitch asked gently. Olivia's face crumpled. She touched her throat, then wrote, Jonathan choked me when I tried to scream for help. After that, nothing came out. Doctor said maybe it would heal, maybe not. I am so sorry, Mitch said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. But you are safe now. Those men will not get to you while I am breathing. I sent a telegraph to Helena this morning to see what Grayson's response would be. I am betting it will be lies. She wrote, "He will say I am insane. He told everyone I was having delusions. That grief over father's death had broken my mind." That is what his men said. Mitch leaned forward, holding her gaze. "But I do not believe them. I believe you, and I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and bring this Jonathan Grayson to justice." The look she gave him then was worth every risk he was about to take. It was pure trust, pure hope, the look of someone who had been drowning and just found solid ground. She reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. Her hand was small and cold in his, and he squeezed back reassuringly. "We will figure this out," he promised. "Together." She wrote one more message on the slate, hesitating before showing it to him. "Why are you helping me?" Mitch thought about that for a moment, trying to find words for something he did not entirely understand himself. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because no woman should have to face what you have faced alone. And maybe because I have been looking for something worth fighting for, and I think I just found it." Color rose in her cheeks, and she looked down at the slate, using her sleeve to wipe it clean nervously. When she looked back up at him, there was something different in her eyes, something tentative and new, like a flower opening to the sun after a long winter. Mrs. Patterson chose that moment to bustle in with fresh coffee, breaking the spell. "You two look serious as judges," she said, pouring for both of them. "I take it we are dealing with something worse than a runaway daughter. Murder, conspiracy, and attempted forced marriage," Mitch said grimly. "Olivia is a witness to a killing, and the killer wants her back under his control so she cannot testify against him." Gertrude's face went hard as stone. "Then he will have to go through this entire town to get her. I will spread the word. Every man, woman, and child in White River will be watching out for her." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Patterson, but those 3 men are dangerous. They are professionals. I do not want anyone getting hurt on account of this. This is our town, Marshal. We protect our own." Gertrude set down the coffee pot with a decisive thunk. "Besides, you cannot watch her every minute of every day by yourself. You will need help." She was right, and Mitch knew it. He had been thinking along similar lines himself. All right, but nobody takes any unnecessary risks. "If those men make a move, people get out of the way and let me handle it. That is an order, Mrs. Patterson." "You cannot give me orders, Mitch Jenkins. I am not one of your deputies." But she smiled as she said it. "I will pass the word carefully." Nothing too obvious, just folks keeping their eyes open. After breakfast, Mitch spent the morning making arrangements. He deputized 2 men he trusted, Carl Winters and Frank Murphy, both steady hands who could shoot straight and keep their heads in a crisis. He made sure they understood the situation and what was at stake. "This woman is under the protection of this office," he told them. "Anyone who tries to take her by force will be arrested. If they resist arrest, we will respond accordingly." "Clear, Crystal Marshal," Carl said. He was a rancher in his 40s, weathered and tough. "Those 3 at the hotel, they are the ones looking for her." "That is right. They are claiming legal authority, but I believe that authority is fraudulent. Until I can prove it one way or the other, we keep Miss Grayson safe and those men under watch. Consider it done." The telegraph response came back around noon, and it was exactly what Mitch had expected. Jonathan Grayson confirmed that he had hired the 3 men to retrieve his mentally unstable cousin, who had developed delusions after her father's death. He provided a description that matched Olivia, and he demanded that she be held for her own safety until his men could transport her back to Helena. There was no mention of marriage, no mention of property disputes, just the concerned words of a relative trying to help a troubled young woman. Mitch read it twice, then crumpled it in his fist. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, and it would probably stand up in any court if it came to that. Olivia's word against Grayson's, with no proof and no witnesses to the murder or anything else she had claimed, unless Mitch could find some. He sent a second telegraph, this one to the Montana Territorial Marshal's office in Helena, asking about the death of Thomas Grayson and any subsequent investigations. That would take longer to get a response, possibly several days, but it might provide the evidence he needed. In the meantime, he had to keep Olivia safe and keep those 3 men from taking her. The first part was relatively easy, as long as she stayed at the boarding house or otherwise out of sight. The second part was more complicated. The 3 men came to his office that afternoon, demanding to know if he had heard from Grayson. "I did," Mitch said, leaning back in his chair and projecting more calm than he felt. "He confirmed your story, but I have some questions about the circumstances that I am waiting to have answered. Until then, Miss Grayson stays in protective custody." "You found her." Scarface, whose real name Mitch had learned was Cobb, leaned forward aggressively. "Where is she?" "In protective custody, as I said. Safe and secure until I am satisfied that releasing her to you is the right course of action." "That telegram gives you no legal right to hold her," one of the younger men, named Riker, said hotly. "She is not accused of any crime." "And you are not accused of any crime yet either," Mitch replied evenly. "But if you try to remove anyone from my custody without proper authorization, that will change quickly. So I suggest you continue to be patient, gentlemen. The law is sometimes slow, but it is thorough." They left angry, but they left. Mitch watched them go and knew he was buying time, nothing more. Eventually, they would get impatient. Eventually, they would try something. He needed to be ready when they did. That evening, he went back to the boarding house to check on Olivia. He found her in the parlor with Mrs. Patterson and 2 other women boarders, helping to mend linens. It was a peaceful domestic scene, so at odds with the violence hanging over everything that it made his chest ache. Olivia looked up when he entered, and her face brightened immediately. She set down her sewing and came to him, the slate in her hand. "Did you hear from Helena?" She had written. "I did. Grayson confirmed what his men said. He is claiming you are unstable and need to return to his care." Mitch kept his voice low, not wanting to alarm the other women. "But I sent another inquiry to the Territorial Marshal's office, asking about your father's death. If there was anything suspicious, if there were any questions raised, it might give us leverage." She nodded, though her expression was troubled. She wrote quickly, "What if they take me before you get an answer?" "They will not," Mitch said firmly. "I have deputies watching the boarding house in shifts. Nobody gets in or out without us knowing, and if they try anything, we will arrest them." "For what?" she wrote. "They have papers saying they can take me. For disturbing the peace. For assault if they lay hands on you. For suspicion of murder if I can make any of that stick." He smiled grimly. "I can be very creative with charges when I need to be, Miss Grayson. Trust me on that." She did trust him. He could see it in her eyes, and it humbled him. This woman had every reason to trust no one, and yet she had placed her faith in him, a stranger who happened to wear a badge. He stayed for dinner, Mrs. Patterson insisting over his protests that he needed to eat properly. The meal was simple but good. Roast chicken and potatoes with greens from Gertrude's garden. Olivia sat beside him at the table, and he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved, the small sounds she made, the occasional brush of her arm against his. After dinner, they sat on the porch while the sun set. Olivia brought her slate, and they communicated in a mix of writing and gestures that was becoming easier with practice. "Tell me about yourself," she wrote. "You know my story. What is yours?" Mitch leaned back in the rocking chair, considering what to say. "Not much to tell, really. Grew up in Missouri, fought in the war, drifted for a few years after. Ended up in South Dakota and took to law work. Been wearing a badge in one form or another for about 8 years now. White River for the last 6. That is more than not much," she wrote with what might have been a smile. "The war was hard, very." He did not elaborate. The war was something he tried not to think about, the blood and the death and the senselessness of it all. "But it taught me what matters. Taught me to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Is that why you became a marshal?" "Partly. Also because I am good at it." He shrugged. "Everyone needs to be good at something. Turns out I am good at reading people, staying calm in a crisis, and shooting straight. Those are useful skills in my line of work." She wrote, "I am glad you are good at it. I do not think I would have made it this far without you." "You made it to White River on your own," Mitch pointed out. "That took courage and determination. You are stronger than you think, Olivia." She looked down at the slate, then erased it and wrote carefully, "I do not feel strong. I feel scared all the time." "Being scared and being brave are not opposites," Mitch said quietly. "Brave is being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. You have been doing that since the day you escaped. That is brave." When she looked up at him, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. She reached over and took his hand, just holding it, and they sat like that in companionable silence while the sky darkened and the first stars came out. Mitch knew he was getting in too deep. Knew that his feelings for this woman were going beyond professional duty into something more personal, more complicated. He should pull back, keep things strictly about the case and nothing else. But when he looked at Olivia, saw the hope and trust in her eyes, he could not bring himself to do it. Maybe it was all right to care. Maybe it was even necessary. After all, he needed to want to protect her with everything he had because the danger was far from over. The next day brought trouble, just as Mitch had known it would. Cobb and his men started searching the town systematically, knocking on doors, demanding to search buildings. They claimed they had the authority under the papers Grayson had provided, and they were not taking no for an answer. Mitch intercepted them at the general store, where they were trying to bully old Mr. Henderson into letting them search his back rooms. "That is enough," Mitch said, his hand resting on his gun. "You have worn out your welcome, gentlemen. It is time for you to leave White River." "We are not leaving without the girl," Cobb said flatly. "We have a job to do and we are going to do it. Then you will do it somewhere else, not in my town." Mitch stepped forward, his deputies flanking him. Carl and Frank looked ready for trouble, and several armed townspeople had gathered as well, drawn by the commotion. "This is your last warning. Mount up and ride out, or I will arrest all 3 of you for harassment and disturbing the peace." "On whose authority?" Riker demanded. "You are just a small-town marshal. Grayson has powerful friends. You are way out of your depth here, Jenkins." "Maybe so. But in White River, I am the law and what I say goes. Now move along before this gets ugly." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mitch could see Cobb calculating, weighing his options. They were outnumbered here in the middle of town, but that did not mean they would give up. It just meant they would try a different approach. Finally, Cobb smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Fine. We will go. But this is not over, Marshal, not by a long shot. You are making a mistake protecting that girl." "I will take that risk." They rode out, but Mitch knew it was not the end. They would wait until dark, then circle back. They would try to grab Olivia quietly, avoid a confrontation they could not win. which meant Mitch needed to move her, get her somewhere less obvious than the boarding house. He spent the afternoon making arrangements. There was an old line shack about 5 miles out of town, on land owned by Carl Winters. It was remote and defensible, and nobody would think to look there. If Mitch could get Olivia out there safely, he could buy more time for the territorial marshal's office to respond to his inquiries. He explained the plan to Olivia that evening, writing it out on the slate so she would understand every detail. She looked frightened but determined. "Will you stay with me?" she wrote. "I will. I would not send you out there alone." Mitch met her eyes. "It will just be the two of us until this is resolved. If that makes you uncomfortable." She was already shaking her head. She wrote quickly, "I trust you. I feel safe with you." Something warm unfurled in Mitch's chest. "Then we leave tonight after dark. Bring only what you need. We will travel light and fast." They left at midnight, slipping out the back of the boarding house and through the alleys to where Mitch had horses waiting. He had packed supplies earlier: food, blankets, ammunition, and his rifle. He helped Olivia mount, making sure she was secure, then swung up on his own horse. The ride out of town was tense. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made Mitch's hand drift toward his gun. But they made it to the edge of White River without incident, and then out onto the open prairie. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. Olivia rode well for someone who claimed not to be a horsewoman, keeping pace without complaint. They followed the White River west, then cut north toward the line shack, arriving just before dawn. The shack was exactly what its name suggested: a small one-room cabin with a stone fireplace, a couple of bunks, and not much else. But it was solid and secure, with a good view of the surrounding terrain. Mitch could see anyone approaching from a long way off. He got a fire going while Olivia explored the small space, such as it was. There was not much to explore, but she seemed to need to move, to do something with her nervous energy. Finally, she sat on one of the bunks and pulled out her slate. "Now what?" "Now we wait," Mitch said. "I sent word to my deputies about where we would be. They will bring news when there is any to bring. In the meantime, we stay put and stay hidden. How long? As long as it takes. Days, if necessary. Weeks, if that is what it requires." He came and sat on the other bunk, facing her across the narrow space. "I know it is not comfortable, Olivia. I know you probably feel like you are trading one prison for another. But this is temporary. Once I have evidence that Grayson killed your father, we can take this to a higher authority. The territorial courts, the federal marshal, someone with enough power to bring him to justice." She nodded, but she looked tired and sad. She wrote, "I just want my life back. I want to go home." "I know, and you will. I promise you that." Mitch leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You have been incredibly brave through all of this, Olivia. Just hold on a little longer." She set down the slate and rubbed her eyes. When she looked at him again, her expression was vulnerable in a way that made his heart clench. She pointed to herself, then to him, then made a gesture he did not understand. She picked up the slate again. "Why do you care so much? You do not know me. This is not your fight." Mitch thought about that, thought about how to answer honestly without saying too much. "It became my fight the moment you walked into my office," he said slowly. "And as for why I care, I am not entirely sure myself. Maybe because I have seen too much evil go unpunished in my life, and I am tired of it. Maybe because you remind me of why I took this job in the first place. Or maybe because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for, worth protecting." Her eyes widened. Color rose in her cheeks, and she looked down at the slate, then back up at him. She wrote hesitantly, "I think you are a good man, Mitch Jenkins. I am glad I found you." "I am glad you found me too," he said, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. They settled into an uneasy routine over the next few days. Mitch kept watch during the day, dozing in shifts while Olivia slept or tried to occupy herself with the limited diversions available. He had brought a few books from his office, and she read them voraciously, hungry for any distraction from their situation. In the evenings, they cooked simple meals over the fire and talked, or rather, Mitch talked and Olivia wrote responses. She told him about her childhood in Montana, about her father and the ranch he had built from nothing, about how her mother had died when Olivia was 12, and how her father had never remarried, dedicating himself to his land and his daughter instead. He had been a good man, she wrote. Honest and hardworking. He taught me everything about running a ranch, said I would inherit it someday and I needed to know every part of it. He sounds like a wise man, Mitch said, and he was right to trust you with it. When this is over, you will go back to Montana and claim what is rightfully yours. If I can prove Jonathan killed him, if anyone believes me, they will believe you. I will make sure of it. Mitch told her about his own past, things he rarely shared with anyone. About growing up on a farm in Missouri, about joining the army at 17 full of patriotic fervor, about the horrors of the war that had stripped that fervor away and left only grim determination to survive. About the years after, drifting from town to town, trying to find a purpose. I think I was looking for redemption, he admitted one night as they sat by the fire. Trying to make up for all the things I did during the war, all the men I killed even though they were enemies. It does not sit easy taking a life, even when you have to. Olivia reached over and took his hand. She could not speak comfort, but her touch said everything words could not. On the fourth day, Carl Winters rode in with news. Mitch saw him coming from a mile off and met him outside, rifle in hand, just in case. "It is just me," Carl called as he approached. "Got a response from the territorial marshal's office. Thought you would want to see it right away." He handed over a telegram, and Mitch read it quickly, his pulse picking up speed. The territorial marshal reported that there had indeed been questions surrounding Thomas Grayson's death. The ranch foreman had expressed concerns about the suddenness of it, and about Jonathan Grayson's behavior afterward. However, the local doctor had ruled it heart failure, and without evidence to the contrary, no investigation had been opened. But the foreman, a man named Henry Walsh, had continued to voice suspicions. He had been fired by Jonathan shortly after Thomas's death and had left Montana. The marshal included a last known address in Wyoming territory. "This is it," Mitch said, excitement building. "This foreman, Walsh, he might be willing to testify if we can find him. At the very least, his statement that there were suspicions will help Olivia's case." "What do you need me to do?" Carl asked. "Ride to Wyoming, find this Walsh, and bring him back if he is willing. If he is not willing, get a sworn statement from him about what he saw and suspected. Take Frank with you. 2 men will travel safer than 1. What about those 3 men who were looking for Miss Grayson? They are still hanging around White River asking questions. Let them. As long as they do not know where we are, they cannot do anything. Just make sure nobody tells them about this place." Carl nodded. "Nobody will talk. Town is locked up tight. You should have seen Mrs. Patterson when one of them tried to search her boarding house. She ran him off with a rolling pin and some language I did not know she knew. Despite everything, Mitch laughed. That sounds like Gertrude. All right, get going. The sooner you find Walsh, the sooner we can end this." Carl rode off, and Mitch went back inside to tell Olivia the news. She read the telegram twice, her eyes growing bright with hope. "This could work," she wrote. "If Henry will testify, if he saw something that supports what I know, it could be enough." "It will be enough," Mitch said firmly. "We are going to make this right, Olivia. I swear it." She stood and came to him, looking up into his face with an expression that made his breath catch. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and touched his cheek. Her hand was soft and warm, and Mitch found himself leaning into the touch without thinking. They stood like that for a long moment, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised him, but he did not. She had been through enough without him taking advantage, without him complicating things further with his own feelings. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, holding it against his cheek for just a moment before gently lowering it. "Soon," he said quietly. "When this is over and you are safe and free, then we can think about what comes next. But not until then. It would not be right." She nodded, understanding in her eyes, though there was disappointment there too. She picked up her slate. "You are a gentleman, Mitch Jenkins. That is rare." "Not that rare. Just outnumbered sometimes by men who are not." He smiled at her. "Come on. Let us heat up some of that stew from yesterday. I am starving." The waiting was the hardest part. Days stretched into a week with no word from Carl and Frank. Mitch tried to stay patient, reminding himself that Wyoming territory was a long ride and finding one man could take time. But patience was not his strong suit, and the forced inactivity grated on him. Olivia seemed to sense his restlessness. One afternoon, she convinced him to teach her how to shoot his rifle. They set up targets outside and spent an hour with him showing her the basics. She was a surprisingly good shot, steady-handed and calm. "Your father taught you?" he asked. She nodded, then wrote on her ever-present slate. He said every woman on a ranch needed to know how to defend herself and her property. Smart man. They practiced until the light started to fade, and Mitch found himself enjoying it more than he had enjoyed anything in a long time. There was something peaceful about being out here with Olivia, away from the complications of town and the threat hanging over them. Something that felt right in a way he could not quite articulate. That night, after dinner, they sat outside and watched the stars come out. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and vast and beautiful. Olivia sat close to him, and after a while she rested her head on his shoulder. Mitch put his arm around her, and they stayed like that until the fire burned low and the night grew cold. "We should go in," he said reluctantly. She nodded but did not move immediately. Instead, she turned to look at him, and in the firelight her face was soft and open. She wrote on her slate, "I feel safe with you, safer than I have felt since my father died. Thank you." "You do not have to thank me," Mitch said. "I am just doing what is right." She shook her head and wrote, "You are doing more than that. You are giving me hope, giving me a reason to believe things can be better." He did not have words for the way that made him feel, so he just held her closer, and that seemed to be enough. Carl and Frank finally returned on the 8th day, riding in hard with another man between them. Mitch saw them coming and felt relief flood through him. They had found Walsh. Henry Walsh turned out to be a leathery man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a cautious demeanor. He shook Mitch's hand firmly when they were introduced. "Carl here says you are trying to bring Jonathan Grayson to justice," Walsh said without preamble. "I will help any way I can." "That man is poison." "Tell me what you know," Mitch said. They sat around the small table in the line shack, and Walsh told his story. He had worked for Thomas Grayson for 15 years, been foreman for the last 8. He had been present when Jonathan arrived for his visit, and he had watched the dynamics shift. Jonathan was always asking about the ranch finances, about the will, about what would happen if Thomas died, Walsh said. "Made me uneasy, but Thomas just laughed it off. Said his cousin was always a worrier. But then Thomas started getting sick. Just little things at first. Headaches, dizziness, upset stomach. I thought maybe he was working too hard, but it kept getting worse." "Did you see Jonathan put anything in his food or drink?" Mitch asked. "Not directly. But I saw him in the kitchen once, messing with a bottle of Thomas's whiskey. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was just putting it away, but the look on his face—" Walsh shook his head. "I knew something was wrong. 2 days later, Thomas was dead. Why did you not go to the authorities?" "I tried. Went to the local sheriff, told him my suspicions. But Jonathan had already been to see him, told him I was a troublemaker who wanted his job. Sheriff would not listen. Said the doctor had ruled it heart failure and that was good enough for him. After that, Jonathan fired me, told me to get off the property within the hour. I was lucky he did not have me shot." Olivia had been listening intently. Now she pulled out her slate and wrote, "Did you see what he did to me?" Walsh looked at her, his expression softening. "I heard about it, Miss Olivia. Heard he locked you in your room, heard you escaped. I was long gone by then, but I heard from other ranch hands. They said you were lucky to get away." She wrote again, "Will you testify to what you know, in court?" "Absolutely. I will do whatever it takes to see that man hang." Walsh's voice was hard with conviction. Thomas Grayson was a good man and a fair boss. He did not deserve what happened to him, and you do not deserve to be hunted like an animal. Mitch felt something unlock in his chest. "That is exactly what I needed to hear, Mr. Walsh. With your testimony and Miss Grayson's, we should have enough to bring formal charges against Jonathan Grayson." "What do we do now?" Carl asked. "Now we go back to White River, and I send a very detailed report to the Territorial Marshal's office. With Walsh's statement and the circumstances of Thomas Grayson's death, they should have enough to issue an arrest warrant. Then it is out of my hands and into the hands of people with more authority and resources than I have." It took another 2 days to get everything organized. Mitch wrote out a detailed report, including statements from both Olivia and Walsh, and sent it by priority telegraph to Helena. Then he, Olivia, and Walsh rode back to White River under the cover of darkness, taking a roundabout route to avoid any watchers. They arrived in town before dawn and went straight to the boarding house, where Mrs. Patterson greeted them with relief and a rapidly prepared breakfast. "Those 3 men left yesterday," she reported. "Packed up and rode out without a word to anyone. I think they realized they were not going to find Miss Olivia here and gave up. Or they went back to report to Grayson," Mitch said grimly. "Either way, we need to be careful. This is not over yet." But it felt like it might be getting close to over. 3 days later, a response came from the Territorial Marshal's office. Based on the evidence Mitch had provided, a warrant had been issued for Jonathan Grayson's arrest on suspicion of murder. Federal marshals were being dispatched to Montana to take him into custody. Olivia's testimony would be required at trial, but until then, she was free to remain in White River under Mitch's protection. When he told her the news, Olivia actually cried, great heaving sobs of relief that shook her whole body. Mitch held her while she wept, feeling his own eyes sting with emotion. It had been a long fight and it was not quite finished, but they had won the important part. Olivia was safe. Grayson would face justice. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe now, truly safe." She pulled back just enough to look at him, tears still streaming down her face. Then she did something that surprised him. She opened her mouth and tried to speak. Nothing came out at first, just a faint rasping sound, but she kept trying, her face scrunched with effort. "MMM." The sound was barely audible, more breath than voice. Mitch, his name, she had said his name. It was rough and broken, but it was there. Her voice was coming back. "I heard that," he said, grinning. "Say it again, Mitch," clearer this time, though still faint. She smiled through her tears, touching her throat in wonder. "It is coming back. Of course it is. You are healing, Olivia, all of you." He cupped her face in his hands, brushing away her tears with his thumbs. "You are going to be fine. Better than fine." Over the next few weeks, Olivia's voice returned gradually. At first, it was just whispers, single words that she could barely force out. But with practice and patience, it grew stronger. She relearned how to speak, how to shape words and sentences, and Mitch was there for every step of it. He was there for a lot more than that, actually. Now that the immediate danger had passed, he found himself spending most of his free time at the boarding house, sitting on the porch with Olivia, walking with her through town, introducing her to people. She was becoming part of White River, and White River was embracing her in return. Mrs. Patterson offered her a permanent room at a reduced rate, and several women in town began including her in their social activities. She attended church socials and quilting bees, slowly building a life in this place that had given her sanctuary. And through it all, Mitch was by her side, their friendship deepening into something neither of them could quite name but both of them felt. One evening in late August, nearly 2 months after Olivia had first arrived in White River, they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sun set. The heat of the day had finally broken, and a cool breeze came off the river, carrying the scent of grass and water. "Mitch," Olivia said, her voice still soft but much stronger than it had been. "Can I ask you something? Anything? When this is all truly over, when I have testified at the trial and Grayson is convicted, what will you do?" He turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "I will go back to being a marshal, I suppose, same as always." "Why?" "Because I have been thinking." She twisted her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture he recognized. "About what comes next for me. I will inherit the ranch in Montana. That is legally mine now that Grayson has been arrested, but I do not know if I want to go back there. Too many bad memories." "Where would you go instead?" "I thought maybe I could stay here in White River." She looked at him, her green eyes serious. "I like this town, I like the people here, and I—" She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. "And what?" Mitch prompted gently. "And I want to be near you," she finished in a rush. "I know that is probably inappropriate to say. I know you were just doing your job, protecting me. But somewhere along the way it became more than that for me. You became more than that. And I thought maybe, if you felt the same." Mitch was moving before he realized it, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Are you serious?" "Olivia, I have been trying not to say anything because I did not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated. But yes, I feel the same. I have been falling for you since that first morning when you walked into my office and tried so hard to tell me your name." "Really?" She looked up at him, hope and joy mingling on her face. "Really? I love you, Olivia Grayson. I think I have loved you for weeks now, maybe longer. I just did not want to say anything until you were safe and free and could make decisions without any kind of coercion." "I love you too," she said, and her voice was clear and strong. "I love you so much, Mitch Jenkins." He kissed her then, finally, after weeks of wanting to. Her lips were soft and warm, and she melted against him, her arms going around his neck. It was a perfect kiss, sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "So you will stay?" he asked. "Here in White River, if you want me to." "I want nothing more. We can court properly, do this the right way, and when enough time has passed, when you are ready, maybe we can talk about making it permanent." "I would like that," Olivia said. "I would like that very much." They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms as the stars came out, and Mitch felt something he had not felt in years. Complete and utter contentment. He had spent so long drifting, so long looking for purpose and meaning, and he had found it in the most unexpected place. In protecting one terrified woman who could not speak her own name, he had found his future. The trial took place in October in Helena, Montana Territory. Mitch accompanied Olivia, along with Henry Walsh, and a federal marshal named Thomas Garrett who had taken over the case. Jonathan Grayson had been in custody for 2 months by then, and he looked diminished somehow, smaller than the monster Olivia had described. But monsters often looked ordinary in the light of day. That was part of what made them so dangerous. Olivia testified clearly and calmly, recounting what she had seen the night Jonathan poisoned her father's whiskey. She described his threats, his attempt to force her into marriage, the violence he had used to try to silence her. Her voice never wavered, even when the defense attorney tried to rattle her with accusations and insinuations. Walsh testified about the suspicious circumstances surrounding Thomas Grayson's death, about Jonathan's questions regarding inheritance, about his own firing when he tried to raise concerns. The defense tried to argue that it was all circumstantial, that there was no physical evidence, that Olivia was a grieving daughter who had misinterpreted innocent actions. But the jury did not buy it. They had heard the truth in Olivia's voice, seen the conviction in Walsh's eyes, and they rendered their verdict in less than 2 hours, guilty of murder in the first degree. Jonathan Grayson was sentenced to hang. Olivia stood when the verdict was read, and Mitch stood with her, his hand on her back for support. She did not cry or celebrate. She just nodded, accepting that justice had been served. Outside the courthouse afterward, she finally let out a long breath. "It is really over now." "It is really over," Mitch confirmed. "You are free, Olivia, free to live your life however you choose." "Then I choose to live it with you," she said, taking his hand. "If the offer is still open." "The offer will always be open." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "For as long as you will have me." They returned to White River as the leaves were turning gold and red, the Dakota autumn painting the prairie in shades of fire. Olivia officially sold the Montana ranch to a family friend who had worked with her father, using the proceeds to purchase a small house on the outskirts of White River. It was a cozy place with a big kitchen and a porch that looked out over the river, and she spent the winter making it into a home. Mitch courted her properly, as he had promised. They went on Sunday rides and attended church together. They had dinner at the boarding house with Mrs. Patterson chaperoning, and they spent long evenings talking by the fire in Olivia's new parlor. He proposed on Christmas Eve, kneeling in the snow outside her house while she laughed and cried and said yes, before he even finished asking the question. They were married the following spring, in April of 1883, in a ceremony at the White River Church. The whole town turned out for it, packing the small building to capacity. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire service, and even Doc Harrison was seen wiping his eyes. Olivia wore a dress of pale blue silk, and Mitch wore his best suit, the one he saved for weddings and funerals and other important occasions. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Mitch kissed her in front of everyone, not caring who saw or what they thought. This woman was his now, and he was hers, and that was all that mattered. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing that went on until well after dark. Mitch danced with his bride, holding her close and marveling at how much his life had changed in less than a year. He had gone from lonely and purposeless to happily married and looking forward to the future. All because one frightened woman had stumbled into his office and could not speak her own name. They moved into Olivia's house together, and Mitch discovered that he liked having a real home for the first time in his adult life. Liked coming back after a day of work to find dinner cooking and his wife waiting for him. Liked waking up next to her every morning and falling asleep with her in his arms every night. Olivia thrived in White River. Her voice had returned completely clear and strong, though she said it felt different than before. Like something that was broken and healed stronger, she explained. I do not take it for granted anymore. Every word feels like a gift. She became known in town as someone to turn to when help was needed. She organized fundraisers for families in need, helped new mothers with their babies, and volunteered at the church. People loved her for her kindness and her strength, for the way she had overcome such terrible circumstances and built a good life anyway. And she and Mitch were happy. Deeply, profoundly happy in a way that sometimes surprised them both. I never thought I would have this, Olivia admitted one night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest and his arms around her. After everything that happened, I thought I was broken, that I would never feel safe or whole again. You were never broken, Mitch said, kissing the top of her head. Bruised, maybe. Hurt, but never broken. You are the strongest person I know, Olivia. I am strong because you gave me the space to be strong. You never tried to fix me or save me. You just protected me until I could protect myself. That was the greatest gift anyone could have given me. Well, you gave me a few gifts too, like a reason to wake up in the morning, like a home instead of just a house, like love when I had forgotten what that felt like. She tilted her head up to kiss him. Then I would say we are even. Their first child was born in February of 1884, a healthy baby boy they named Matthew Thomas Jenkins, after Mitch and Olivia's father. Mitch had been terrified throughout Olivia's pregnancy, remembering too many women who had died in childbirth, but Doc Harrison and Mrs. Patterson had taken excellent care of her, and the delivery, while long and difficult, went smoothly. Holding his son for the first time, looking down at that tiny red face and those blue eyes that would probably darken to match his own, Mitch felt something break open in his chest. It was love so fierce and immediate that it took his breath away. We made this, he said in wonder, looking at Olivia where she lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. We made a person. We certainly did. She smiled tiredly. Come here, both of you, let me see my boys together. He carefully climbed onto the bed beside her, cradling Matthew with exaggerated caution. Olivia leaned against him, and they looked at their son together, marveling at his perfect tiny fingers and toes, at the wisps of dark hair on his head, at the way he yawned and stretched. He is beautiful, Olivia whispered, just like his father. He is beautiful like his mother, Mitch corrected. I am just lucky he has better taste in parents than I deserved. She laughed softly and kissed his cheek. You deserve everything good in this world, Mitch Jenkins. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it. Matthew was followed by a daughter, Anna Marie, 2 years later, and then another son, James, 2 years after that. The house that had seemed so spacious when it was just the two of them became crowded and chaotic and full of life, exactly the way Mitch had never known he wanted. He continued as Marshal of White River, keeping the peace and protecting the people he had come to think of as his community. Olivia raised their children and maintained her involvement in town affairs, somehow managing to be both a devoted mother and an active citizen. They had their struggles, of course. No life is perfect, and frontier living was hard even in the best of times. There were illnesses and accidents, lean years when the crops failed and money was tight, moments of fear when Mitch faced down dangerous men as part of his job. But through it all, they had each other. When Mitch woke from nightmares about the war or about losing Olivia, she was there to hold him and remind him that he was safe, that she was safe, that their life together was real. When Olivia had her own nightmares about Jonathan Grayson and the weeks she had spent running and afraid, Mitch was there to chase away the darkness and fill it with light. They talked about everything, hiding nothing from each other. Mitch told her stories about his past that he had never shared with anyone, and she told him about the grief and fear she still carried, the scars that might never fully heal. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned how to support and comfort and challenge each other. And they loved each other with a depth and constancy that never faded, even as the years passed, and they grew older. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their mother had been too afraid to speak her name, and how their father had said, "Take your time, you are safe now." How that simple act of kindness and protection had grown into a love that sustained them through everything life threw at them. Matthew, the oldest, was serious and thoughtful like his father, with the same blue eyes and steady demeanor. He became a deputy marshal when he was old enough, following in Mitch's footsteps. Anna was bright and fierce like her mother, with Olivia's green eyes and determined spirit. She became a teacher, educating the children of White River with patience and passion. James was a blend of both parents, easygoing but principled, and he eventually took over the general store, becoming a pillar of the community just as his parents were. Mitch finally retired from marshal work when he was 55, turning over his badge to Matthew and feeling confident that the town was in good hands. He and Olivia had more time together then, time to travel and raid and simply enjoy each other's company without the demands of work and young children. They took a trip back to Missouri, where Mitch showed her the farm where he had grown up. It was smaller than he remembered, shabbier, but walking those fields with Olivia beside him laid some old ghosts to rest. They visited Montana too, riding past the ranch that had once been Olivia's home. She did not want to stop, just to see it from a distance and remember her father. Mitch held her hand while she cried, then drove her away toward the future they were still building together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Mitch took Olivia back to the line shack where they had hidden together all those years ago. It was still standing, though more weathered now, and they spent a night there reminiscing about that tense, frightening time. "I was so scared," Olivia said as they lay on one of the bunks, squeezed together in the narrow space just as they had not quite done back then. "Scared of Grayson finding me, scared of what would happen if he did, but also scared of what I was starting to feel for you. You felt something for me even then. Of course I did. You were kind and brave and handsome, and you treated me like I mattered. Like my life and my safety were important. How could I not fall in love with you?" She traced the lines of his face with her fingers, lingering on the gray now threading through his dark hair. "You saved me, Mitch, not just from Grayson, but from becoming someone bitter and broken. You gave me back my life." "You saved me too," Mitch said. "I was going through the motions before you arrived, just existing without any real purpose. You gave me something to care about, something to fight for. You made me remember why I became a lawman in the first place. To protect people who could not protect themselves, to stand for what is right even when it is hard. We saved each other then," Olivia said, smiling. "That seems like a fair arrangement, the fairest." They made love in that old line shack, slower and gentler than they had when they were young, but no less passionate. And afterward, lying in each other's arms in the darkness, Mitch thought about how lucky he was, how easily things could have gone differently. If Olivia had collapsed before reaching White River, if those 3 men had found her before she found him, if he had not believed her, had not fought for her, had not fallen in love with her, but none of those things had happened. Instead, a frightened woman who could not speak her name had found a marshal willing to protect her. And that marshal had found the love of his life, the purpose he had been seeking, and a family he had never dreamed he would have. It was more than luck, Mitch decided. It was fate. It was meant to be. They lived long lives, Mitch and Olivia Jenkins. They saw White River grow from a small frontier town into a thriving city. They saw their children marry and have children of their own, giving them grandchildren to spoil and delight in. They saw the frontier tamed and civilized, though neither of them were entirely sure that was an improvement. Mitch passed first, at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep with Olivia beside him. His last words were, "I love you," whispered to the woman who had been his partner and his joy for more than 40 years. Olivia lived another 5 years after that, surrounded by family but lonely in a way she had not been since before she met Mitch. She filled her days with her grandchildren and her church work, with friends and books and memories. But every night, she talked to Mitch as if he were still there, telling him about her day and how much she missed him. When she finally followed him, passing quietly in her sleep at 78, the whole town mourned. They buried her next to Mitch in the White River Cemetery, under a large oak tree that provided shade in summer and shelter in winter. The headstone read, "Olivia Grayson Jenkins, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She found her voice and used it for good." And below Mitch's name, "Marshal Theodore Mitch Jenkins, beloved husband, father, and protector. He gave safety to the afraid and justice to the wronged." Their children and grandchildren gathered at the gravesite after the service, telling stories and remembering. Matthew, now gray himself and long since retired from martial work, stood with his arm around his own wife and remembered his parents as they had been when he was young. "They loved each other so much," he said. "Even when things were hard, even when they disagreed or struggled, they always came back to that love. They built their whole lives on it." "They did," Anna agreed, wiping away tears, "and they taught us to do the same. To find someone worth fighting for and then never let them go. To protect the vulnerable," James added, "to stand up for what is right, to be brave even when we are afraid." The lessons Mitch and Olivia had learned and lived by had been passed down to their children, and their children's children, rippling out through generations. The story of how they met, how they fell in love, how they built a life together despite everything trying to tear them apart, became family legend. It was told and retold at holiday gatherings and lazy Sunday afternoons, a reminder of where they had come from and what they stood for. And in White River, in the town that had given Olivia sanctuary and Mitch purpose, their memory lived on. The house they had shared became a historical landmark, preserved and maintained by the town council. The marshal's office, where Olivia had first stumbled through the door, too afraid to speak her name, displayed a plaque commemorating Mitch's 40 years of service. But more than physical monuments, they lived on in the values they had embodied. In the way White River took care of its own, protected those who needed protecting, and stood firm against injustice. In the way people treated each other with kindness and respect, remembering that everyone has a story, everyone has struggles, and everyone deserves compassion. Years later, when a young woman fleeing an abusive situation found her way to White River, she was taken in and protected just as Olivia had been. Given shelter and safety, given time to heal and find her voice, given the support she needed to start over. And when she asked why everyone was being so kind to a stranger, they told her about Marshal Jenkins and his wife Olivia. About how protecting those in need was what White River did, what White River had always done. It was a legacy worth leaving, a story worth remembering. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to say, "Take your time. You are safe now to change everything." To save a life, to inspire love, to create a future neither person could have imagined alone. That was the gift Mitch and Olivia had given each other and the world around them. Safety, love, and the courage to face whatever came next together. And in the end, that was everything.